Hello and welcome to Her Space, the podcast that creates footprints for a purposeful life. Before we dive into this episode, I would like to take a moment to appreciate you for tuning in. Her Space podcast has a vision of becoming the number one health, wellness, and spiritual podcast in Africa and beyond. And you too can be a part of this journey. So if you haven't already, please take a moment to click that subscribe button, like this episode, and share your thoughts in the comment section below. We value your contributions as they help us grow. Thank you for being a part of this. We are joined today at the virtual studio with Oladoyin Idowu. Doing is a mental health professional and an advocate for dyslexia, whom has had firsthand experience on what it is like growing up and living with dyslexia, especially in the context of Nigeria. Of course, I'd like all of you to know that that is an oversimplification of who Doyin is. Doyin is actually a very, very amazing person in every form of the word. Dwayne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Anissa.
So I'd just like to dive right in
Okay.
because there is just so much to unpack.
Yeah.
Right before we got on this call, you also said something that blew my mind, which we would get to eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, my first exposure to dyslexia was, I think, around 2007
Mhm.
on I was watching High School Musical, and I think there was a character there that was dyslexic, and so that was literally my first time ever hearing about the word. And the understanding I had of it then was that it was just the people who had trouble figuring out how to read,
Mhm.
basically. And
Yeah.
I understand now there's a lot more awareness on it, but I
Mhm.
still I still think that it's oversimplified. We don't really get to understand or hear it from
Sure.
people like you who have had to work behind the scenes, in the sense that you have experienced it, but you are
Mhm.
also a psychologist, so you kind of understand what's happening inside and outside. So
Yeah.
please, could you kind of break it down for us,
Okay.
everyone listening here today, what dyslexia is?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question, Anissa. So dyslexia is pretty much a difference, a specific learning difference. Specific because when you do an assessment for someone that has dyslexia, you find that for sets of their brains are working, so they have normal IQs, nothing is wrong with their brain. They didn't fall off as a child. It's just that they have a difficulty that is specific to learning. So when we're trying to identify someone that has dyslexia, you most likely even have to do a test to be sure that it's not a problem with the ability to reason, or nothing is wrong with the brain. If you have found that all of these functions are working properly, yet this person is still struggling to read, those are pointers for dyslexia. So it is a specific learning difficulty that affects the ability for auditory processing, word recognition, which are pretty much things that you require to learn in a traditional classroom environment. To put it in a very simplified manner, children who have dyslexia are children who, you have engagement with them and they appear, in quotes, to be smart, but when you look at their academic records, it's not correlating with the child that you felt like you just interacted with. So they will typically struggle to read, write, and at the foundation of it is even things like phonological awareness, which is the foundation of learning to read, the science of reading. Phonological awareness, when a child can learn to manipulate words and then form sentences with it and then build it up into comprehension. A child with dyslexia would struggle even at the very like minimal, like at the point of alphabet to sound recognition. So once there is that struggle, when you try to build up on it to two-letter words, three-letter words, and most schools, they don't go through the intricacies of trying to teach the child the skills of how to manipulate it, because some neurotypical children would learn without over breaking down the intricacies, they are able to grasp. So for children with dyslexia, they're not able to. So most of them end up having to go through school without getting the basic literacy skills. So they now start to struggle when they start getting into complex academic levels, because at the very basic, you did not help them solve their
Yeah.
reading challenge. So that's me trying to further simplify dyslexia so that anyone can understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I liked what you said about it being a different form of learning, not a disability, so to
Yeah.
speak. It's more or
Yeah.
less a differences in the way we learn because in the scientific field, we have the majority of people are neurotypical in the sense that we have a typical way of learning and perceiving things. And then we have the neurodivergent who have a slightly different neurological structure to how they learn things.
Yeah.
And so we have people on the autistic spectrum, we have the ADHD, and we have dyslexia, and amongst others.
Yeah.
And recently I was reading a research that blew my mind about dyslexia, and it was presented to two pictures were presented to neurotypical individuals and neurodivergent individuals, and it was like a box made of wood.
Mm-hmm.
What that's the first picture was a box made of wood, and then it will have beside it another picture with
Mm-hmm.
different parts of that box.
Mm-hmm.
So then both pictures represented the same thing, but then the difference was that one picture you would be able to make the wood out of the parts. And in the second picture, you won't be able to make the box out of the parts. And
Yeah.
the task was to recognize which one was possible to make a box
Mm-hmm.
and which one wasn't. And it was found that actually children with dyslexia were faster in recognizing that these pieces would make a box and these pieces won't make a box than the neurotypical kids. So, what that tells us is, I think, the kind of interpretation we got of that is that sometimes we have dyslexics that can look at, say, a jigsaw puzzle and they see the whole picture.
Exactly.
Whereas the neurotypical individual, when we see a jigsaw puzzle, we're just seeing pieces, we're not seeing the
Mm.
whole picture. And I think that's amazing. That's like a superpower. What do you think?
I quite agree to the fact that dyslexia, especially when we start to look at it from a place of strength, because
Yeah,
academic yardstick is what everybody has used to judge dyslexia for the longest. It does
yeah,
look as
yeah.
though dyslexics are in the deficit, right?
Mm-hmm,
But there
mm-hmm.
are areas of strength that people with dyslexia thrive in. I have my areas of strength,
Yeah,
and I've grown to acknowledge that.
yeah,
So I do agree with you that dyslexics are, picture thinkers and 3D imaginations. I was
yeah,
telling somebody the other day that if you give me an information in bits, I cannot provide with you what you need. I need to be able to paint a full picture of it.
yeah,
So if I can paint a full picture of it, it would surprise you the extent to which I'm able to provide you with resource, because I'm thinking about it from the different angles, because my brain is seeing it in pictures, so my brain
yeah,
can then now pick it from all the angles that you may
yeah,
not even
yeah.
likely considered.
Mm-hmm,
So that's also what translates even in the academic environment for students with dyslexia. When you
yeah,
teach them, you're teaching them, and the models of which you're using to teach them is more, the strength is more to people who are logical thinkers, but they
mm-hmm.
are creative thinkers, they're picture thinkers. So you need to
Yeah,
teach them in the ways that their brain can form a mental picture of it. And for
yeah,
children, you need to build their like memory bank. So with
mm-hmm.
children, for instance, if you're trying to talk to them with words, they don't already have enough in their memory bank to translate it into pictures. So you need to actually fill them up with pictorials. You're teaching them mathematics. You bring the items, let them feel it and see it. As an adult, that you can talk to an adult, and the adult can think through experiences that they've had and draw out images from it. But as children, you need to give them things that they can use to build up their memory bank, so that they can now learn what you're trying to teach.
Okay, that's amazing. So, Doyin, I've heard you mention children quite a few times, and I was just curious to know if dyslexia is only present in children.
No, dyslexia is lifelong.
Mm-hmm,
child, you would have dyslexia, and you grow into an adult who still has dyslexia.
Mhm.
Speaking to you right now, I'm still as dyslexic as I was when I was born.
Mhm.
So it impacts adults as much. I think that one of the things that we are just trying to do in at this area of things is we're trying to do early intervention rather than remediation, because the
Yeah.
cost of remediation is more expensive than the cost of early intervention. When we
Mhm.
talk about remediation for adults with dyslexia, we're going beyond the academic issues now. We're looking into secondary psychological conditions like self-esteem issues, imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
depression, substance use. It is a lot. So
Mhm.
that's why a lot of our focus is on seeing how we can contribute to research, seeing how we can develop programs that can ensure that people, especially people who are interacting with children, know
Mhm.
this so that they can help early enough so that we're not having to deal with, the secondary impact of not doing anything about it. And so why there's a lot of focus on children, but adults grow up and still have dyslexia.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Um, so I'd like to ask, because you mentioned the struggle and all of that, and I like
Mhm,
to imagine you sort of lived two lives. Because there was a time that you were not aware, probably, and this is
mhm,
me just saying, I might be wrong, but
mhm.
there
Yeah.
must have been a time in your life where you were not aware that you're struggling with dyslexia,
Mhm,
probably in your early childhood and all of that. And then, of course, there was a time after you realized it. So that's why I say two lives, because on the one
mhm.
hand, you were probably battling with something and it must have been difficult, but you really were not aware of it. And then you
Yeah.
crossed to the other part and it was a turning point. So could you kind of take us, like, give us a bit of a glimpse of what it was like for you growing up with
Okay.
dyslexia?
Okay. And you're very correct about having lived two lives, because even for healing, that's how I compartmentalize it.
Mhm.
I compartmentalize the part before I knew that I had dyslexia, or I knew that I had dyslexia because I was struggling with it, but I didn't have a name to it. So the
Mhm.
part before then and then the part after that. But let me just take you down memory lane a little bit. So,
Okay.
one of the things that you usually that I usually find striking whenever my mom or any adult in my family would describe me as a child, they would describe me as someone who was curious and inquisitive, and just out there. Like, I was always out there. So my mom would say that one of the first, she might be joking, I don't know that, but one of the first things that I learned to say was why, because I always
Mhm.
wanted to know the why behind a lot of things. I couldn't tell
Mhm.
her. But so I grew up, went into school with that curious mind, wanting to learn. But very quickly, that became a tumultuous experience for me, because I started to see disparities between myself and my peers. They could learn in the ways that I could not learn, and I could never understand why I could not learn the way that
Mhm.
they could learn. Right? I just knew that there was something off with me, and with knowing that there was something off with me, continuing to put consciousness in my mind, because um you know I didn't have a name to it. But
Mhm.
immediately the consciousness for me was that maybe I'm abnormal, maybe I'm not meant to be here, maybe there was just something wrong. And I
Mhm.
tried to ask questions, because I was a child who likes to ask questions. So I tried to ask questions even when going for routine doctor appointment, maybe to treat malaria. When the doctor asked me for the symptoms of my malaria, I would try to squeeze in there some of the things I'm experiencing in the classroom, hoping that
Yeah.
somebody has an information for me. But nobody had any information as
Mhm.
to what was it. So they will most likely just always move aside that particular part of what I said and focus
Mhm.
more on the part that they're most able to provide me responses for. But what this translated for me as a child in that moment was, I felt like, I always describe it as being put in a box, in a very small box, that you are already, like, the box is smaller than you, so you're already even cramping to fit into that box, right? And then, despite cramping to fit into that box, the box is so tight you can neither move left nor move right. You can't raise up your head. You can't stretch your leg. It is so cramped. It doesn't have any hair opening. It's just a box. That's how I
Mhm.
always describe that experience. No one can explain what you're experiencing to you, yet
Mhm.
they have expectations of you. They're disappointed that you cannot do what they need you to do.
Yeah.
and you are in the middle of all these adult expectations. Your teachers are disappointed in you, your parents are reminding you of how much they're spending on you, and you are seeing your friends do what you cannot do, and you don't understand why you can't do what you cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
It is
Mm-hmm.
such a dark place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then immediately I started accepting the realities that, you know, could be likely with the fact that, okay, maybe people say I'm lazy, maybe that's what I am. Maybe people say I'm dumb, maybe that's what I am, because there wasn't any other reality that was different from, what appeared, right? So I grew up to have, very negative sense of self. And that also translated even into all my other relationships. I think very early enough as well, I started becoming very conscious of my body image as well, because there was a societal standard of beautiful. And when I started becoming desperate about my academic pursuits, I felt like if I couldn't achieve academically, maybe beauty is another way that I can get ahead in life. And then it appeared to me that maybe I didn't even have that as well. So, that started making me also have like a false sense of self. So you can see how it transitioned from academic to, other domains and other areas. And I have people describe my head as large. I would say things like, despite my enormously large head, there's nothing in it. Those are kind of the comments that you hear from, adults around you in everywhere that you go. And there didn't seem to be any place of escape, because if I'm at home, my mom is reminding me that I need to be reading, not playing. If I'm in school, my teachers are reminding me what I'm supposed to be doing. And I was just in the middle of all this, not exactly understanding what was going on. Like, it was so confusing. So I didn't find out until I was 16. And at this time, I decided that, see this school matter, I'm done. I'm not doing it again. Like, it's about time we quit. It's just not working for me. I'm not. There's no fulfillment. I'm just sad. Like, I was in a constant state of sadness, especially with school. I started having anxiety episodes where I can not breathe. Like, just thinking about an activity just takes my breath away. It became so anxiety provoking for me. And so I just finished A levels in that period, and I'm like, you know what, I quit. And I must tell you that leading up to that period as well, there were times when my parents would make me do extra lessons, especially in secondary school. So there was no resting time for me. Whenever my friends or siblings were resting, my parents were trying to reinforce the little that I've learned by getting me tutors. And then in the hands of tutors as well, you find tutors who would also emphasize that you're not good enough, you're not good for nothing. And then you will see those vulnerable, those predators as well, like men, who think that it's an opportunity for them to also take advantage of a young girl and tell you things like, allowing them touch you so they can give you the mark that you need, since your brain wouldn't even give you those marks anyway. And, just those kind of very complicated situations. I think I also came across a period where someone also suggested using substance marijuana to help, stimulate focus for me. There were different things, different vices that came in that period. I think so. Yeah, and then also the fact that because of a terrible sense of self, and because I was desperate for a place of support, like I mentioned, there didn't seem to be support in any of my closest communities. So if somebody as much as gave me attention, I would soak it in. Even
Mm-hmm.
when the rest of it is toxicity, I would just soak it in, just because it's the most I was getting.
Mm-hmm.
But fast forward to when I was 16, I finally decided that, I quit. I'm not doing this anymore. It's not working for me. I'm sad. I'm not, nothing. And then in that period, I started having suicidal ideation because, yeah, I just didn't feel like I fit to be in the world. And the religious defense for suicide also is where you would spend the rest of your life when you kill yourself, right? And
Yeah.
even in that period, I analyzed it, and it felt to me in that period that maybe it's not that bad. I'm sure it should be better than what I'm currently facing. So
Mm-hmm.
I got to the point where I started analyzing it and started, trying to rationalize, the way to go, right? Started thinking, what are the processes? Should I do it this way, or this would be hurt less? Maybe I have the maybe I can cope with this other area. I'm trying not to use specific words so that it's not triggering for
Yeah. Yeah, I
That's why
understand.
I'm just going around it. So just trying to explore the different ways in which I felt like I could go. And then I eventually picked a particular way. And the day I decided that I was going to do it, I had a friend who interrupted me and just stopped me from doing it. And, the rest is history. But another thing also that was in me, and I didn't know where that came from as well, was there was a there was a spirit in me that was always big on success. I was ambitious without even knowing how to materialize it. My family members call me first lady till date. Extended family as well, they call me first lady till date. And this came from when we're acting children plays with my siblings and cousins, and they're having two roles of parents, moms, aunties. And I will always insist that I'm neither a mom or anybody in this movie. If you want me to act this movie with you, you give me the role of first lady. It's either that. It's either that or nothing. And in this roles, I'm running an empire, and I'm running government offices, and that's what and I think at the time, maybe in the small me didn't even know that women could hold position of power. I think I felt like it has to be your partner, and then you would now jigger.
Yeah.
um so I just had that innate spirit in me that would never give up. So even after I decided to drop out of school and quit, I started thinking to myself, what would become of me? Like, how do I make it in life? How do I make it ahead? What can I do? So I started exploring skills in design. That's where the entrepreneurial bit of me came to life. I first tried to learn to cook, but I realized very quickly that as much as I like to cook, cooking is not something I wanted to do commercially, something I just enjoyed doing for family on my own terms. So I then went on to learn design. This entails event decoration, interior design, and set design for movies. And then I started doing work in these areas and saw that, okay, maybe I'm not that bad. Maybe at least it's something that I was good at, and I was doing it, and it was working well for me. I was earning money as well, and I was working with really big shots. But my parents, traditional Nigerian culture as well, we put um, so much joy around school, or so much emphasis around school, is what I
Just
should
yeah.
say. So
Mm-hmm.
even when they could see me doing things and earning money, they would just keep on reminding me that, young lady, you need to go back to school.
Yeah.
All this thing that you're doing is, just school, school, school. At least get a first degree. After a first degree, you can do whatever you want. Those are
Mm-hmm.
like the things that was very common in what they were saying. But even at that, thought of school again would just fill me with anxiety. I'm like, "Mm-mm, I'm not doing this." So fast forward one day, I was so impressed by one of the projects I did, and it started to give me a good sense of self. And I was curious to know what exactly was wrong with me about the school matter in the first place. So I went to
Yeah.
Google and I asked Google questions. And in all of my searches that day, I came across this article that was talking about forms of disabilities and different issues and all that. I just kept continuing doing my research, and then I came across dyslexia. And it felt like how Albert Einstein felt when he said "Eureka!" light bulb moment. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, this was a light bulb moment. This
Mm.
looks like me. This feels like me. Yeah, I think I am dyslexic. But it's not enough to read an article and diagnose yourself. They
Yeah,
literally tell you
obviously.
that when you feel something, don't go to Google.
Mm.
So then I was curious. I wanted to know if I was. And then I started searching for places where I could do a test. But all the locations had the US or the UK, and I'm like, Nigeria. And I couldn't find anything that could, show me whether or not I had dyslexia. So I go and meet my parents and tell them, oh, I want to do this test, or it's in the US. All that. And the first and foremost, let's forget dollar rate for now. The first and foremost is that don't attribute yourself to being disabled. It would affect how you see yourself. Blah 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 blah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Long and short, they were not in support of that expenditure. They were not ready to convert their naira to dollars, and we're just not interested in that bit. It just seemed as though I'm looking for another excuse to
Mm-hmm.
not do what I needed to do. So that conversation ended with them. For me, with this new sense of identity, possible identity, I was desperate. I wanted to know. I wanted to be something. I wanted to fit into something, no matter what it was. I just needed to feel like I was part of something. So I
Yeah.
wasn't going to take no for an answer. So I said my own research. And I found like online screenings that you could do that could just point out to the degree of level of potential that you may be dyslexic. And that was okay for me. At least, a beggar does not have choice. So I tried those, and that just gave me the sense of, okay, yeah, I could be dyslexic. But I just had that innate spirit within me as well, that one day I would just go to the US or the UK and do an assessment.
Yeah.
I eventually did my assessment in 2019 that confirmed that I had dyslexia. But
Mhm.
but leading up to that period anyway, when I discovered, which was in 2015, the word dyslexia, um, and doing the screening that told me that, okay, I could potentially be dyslexic and all, that now started to unravel things within me where I wanted to understand myself more, because it felt
Mhm.
like now I had an identity and I wanted to understand this identity. Now, in unraveling this identity, it also became apparent that I had like psychological conditions, like I had, I was sad perpetually. I had a terrible sense of self. I would always accept anything from anybody just because I didn't think that I was good enough. And that child who was curious at the time when I was growing, I started to reduce myself. I started, keeping to myself because I didn't want to say anything or do anything that would draw attention to me, that would make you remember that I'm not smart, you know and that became like, so there was all that. It was layers of many issues that I needed to solve. And this
Mhm.
also took me into the whole mental health bit of trying to find resources. Yeah, I could find psychologists, but accessibility in Nigeria also became apparent. It's either too costly or you can't even find, right? And this, again, remember that this is an expenditure that I was backing on without my parents' financial support, because they're not ready to agree that, yeah, it just didn't seem right to them that anything could be wrong with you. Just pray about it and read more. That was their solution to
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
So rounding up very quickly, I just, entered into that space where I started trying to digest research papers on dyslexia and on mental health and psychology as a field. It was mostly video resources for me because I do not enjoy reading like per
Mhm.
se, but I would digest as much as I could. And the more information I was getting, I just had conviction in my spirit that I wasn't the only one that had this condition. So I started sharing it on my social media page, Instagram at the time, and I would share it. But because of self-esteem issues as well, after a few hours, I'll go and delete it, depending on
Mhm.
the engagement level. But people started to see it, and some people started to, reach out to me, and even parents would reach out to me saying that they have a child who had, similar conditions, and then they'll ask me questions to try, and I'm like, oh, this me that you're asking questions, myself, I don't know. I'm still exploring
You're
myself.
just exploring, yeah.
And then, but they were actually, and me, I think another thing as well for me as well was that I've always had this very strong strength in empathy. Even before I discovered that dyslexia, like the name dyslexia, I've always had a strong sense of empathy, where I felt like, okay, since my own life is in chaos and I will not amount to anything, I may as well just, get some fulfillment in helping other people's lives be better.
Mhm.
So, those were some of the things that that those are some of my principles that I grew with without even knowing consciously. So in that period when people would reach out to me and I didn't have answers to their question, I didn't leave it at that. I now started seeking answers for
Mhm.
them, and I would reach out to people, specialists in the US as well, who could answer the question. And some of them were very open to answering some of my questions and sharing links to resources that I could utilize. So I started giving people responses back in Nigeria, and it became apparent as well that Nigeria had a community of people who had dyslexia. And that's
Mhm.
what started me starting One World Africa Foundation. And that's what we're doing to date. Thank you.
Hey. That was a really, really powerful story. So much to unpack. And especially because of all the mental health challenges that you have associated with just not knowing, not being aware that this was what was happening inside of you. And you just had to face so much, so much, to the point that you actually contemplated or thought about or even planned to take your own life, but for the intervention of your friend, whom I pray wherever she is, she's doing well in life. Um, Now tell us a little about One World Africa because you've touched on it, but would like to know what is the platform about? What do you do?
Okay. So, One World Africa was okay because One World Africa has also lived two lives now.
Okay.
It started as an advocacy organization. It really was just advocacy. It was me answering questions of people who had questions about dyslexia, looking for resources for them, pointing them to directions where they could utilize some of these resources. But remember that at the time I dropped out of school, so I wasn't even like a qualified professional to provide, any specific support for anybody. I just had my lived experience. And something to know about dyslexia is no two people experience dyslexia the same
Mhm.
way. So those were not enough for me to become a consultant. So I was just an advocate. So I was
Okay.
advocating for dyslexia. But the more people asked me questions about it, the more I tried to also reach out to specialists who could answer their questions, the more issue of accessibility became an issue because some of these people are from low income communities, and then you're reaching out to a specialist who who, if they're providing any resource or support for you, you need to pay, right, and they cannot afford it. And
Mhm.
that put a weight within me to try to see what more I can do. So I went back to the school in 2017 to study psychology. So the idea behind studying psychology was so that I'm better equipped to be able to provide help that is more structured and not just from my personal experience. So that went, so yeah, back to One World Africa. So it's advocacy, still advocacy, but it was majorly advocacy where we're just creating awareness about dyslexia, its existence, and just trying to provide support here and there. Within One World Africa, we also launched something called the Dyslexia Tribe, which is a support group for adults living with dyslexia. Because, like I mentioned, if you're an adult living with dyslexia, you most likely have live with your own dyslexia undiagnosed and you've developed like secondary conditions. So, just a support group to help you talk through some of these issues and just know that you're not alone and just learn, from peer support. So, advocacy. We've done advocacy for the past 8 years, but currently we are developing structures now that allow us to provide structured support.
Mhm.
Yeah, we've grown to the point where we want to now, go beyond advocacy and provide support. And, we've done teacher trainings in the past, mostly in collaborations with other, specialists and things like that, or other organizations. But now we're trying to develop programs, especially programs that would target people from low income communities as well, just so that they get structured support in terms of training. So, capacity building trainings for teachers, for parents, and even peer support for children. We have a program called the Dyslexia Ally Program, which is actually an empathy training for children. Because I remember even during my time, which is also similar stories with other people with dyslexia, that the kind of school environment, the school climate became very toxic for them, and their classmate contributed to this. So the Dyslexia Ally program is also to teach classmates about inclusion and diversity and create awareness about dyslexia, just so that we start to imbibe in them the culture of support and inclusion. Because yes, this person is dyslexic, but you also meet other people who are different around you, and it might not be dyslexia. So when we start to teach people early enough about inclusion, it starts to just create an ecosystem of support where we're not just empowering parents, we're not just empowering teachers, but we're also
Mhm.
empowering, your peers, so that the support system we create will be formidable,
Mhm.
so that there are no cracks. Because, yeah, so we're just developing programs right now,
Mhm.
about to launch our support arm.
Mhm.
So that's what One World Africa is about.
I love that. Thank you so much. I love that you are including teachers in the training and the entire education structure because it probes the question. For the longest time, the world has treated everyone to be neurotypical, and that's even where the concept of normal and abnormal comes from. Because if you are not a certain way, the world will classify you as abnormal. But
Yeah.
now, I like to say that even God is showing us that normal has no single structure in the way he created us, because we're all so different. People are neurodivergent in so many ways. And I absolutely, absolutely love the fact that you are carrying children along in this, teaching them how to be empathic, how to be a support system instead of people that are putting children that are struggling down.
Mhm.
And I see this like this is sort of a systematic thing for us back home in Nigeria, especially back in the day when we were growing up. It was like this sort of bullying and putting people down was such a norm. It was generally well accepted. And I'd like to think that we're seeing the effects of it now, because any system that supports bullying is actually just breeding oppression and tolerance for oppression. And it keeps happening unless someone breaks the cycle. And I'm just happy to see that you're doing it. I recently went to this a store here in England, and I met this lady at the till. I was about to pay, and she was in charge of the aisle, and she had a huge badge on her that said I am autistic, but I wasn't paying attention to it. So I
Mhm.
tried to pay. I tried to hand her some of the stuff that I bought so I can
Mhm.
pay, but then she was pointing her hand at a different direction. And we did that about 3 times. And then she just pointed to her badge and she said to me, I'm sorry, I'm autistic and I don't
Mhm.
understand why you're not handing me the stuff you want to pay for. And then she was like, I'm overstimulated. I'm going to take a break. So she stepped away. There was
Mhm.
a huge queue behind me, about 4 or 5 people. Well, not that huge, but about 4 or 5 people were behind me.
Yeah.
But she stepped away and she took about 5 minutes, and then she came back and nobody, not a single person complained or nagged or there was no comment.
Mhm.
She just came back and she was like, are you ready to pay now? And I said yes. And then I of course I made sense of the situation because she communicated, so I was able
Mhm.
to follow the direction of her hands. And what
Yeah.
that experience stuck with me, because what I kept thinking was, if this had happened back home, it would have been so easy. In fact, the idea that she even has a job is amazing, because it would have been
Mhm.
so easy for her not to be able to be employed, because
Mhm.
everyone would be like, oh no, she's not going to be able to do the work. And that's already putting her down as a human being and telling her she's not good enough. And
Yeah.
then the amount of patience that was shown, the whole structure of it and how it just accepted her, it fascinated me so much, and I would really love to see that for us back home.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for the work you do. Honestly,
Yeah.
Dwayne, I feel like the world is a better place because you are in it. So now let's talk about the elephant in the room, you writing. So when I came here, actually, the conversation was supposed to be about Black Brilliant and Dyslexic, but today you revealed to me that you have written a second book, and that is so amazing. So I'd like to know about your experience, anything at all you want to share with us about Black Brilliant and Dyslexic, and then the new book, which I haven't even heard the name yet. So yes, please.
All right. Thank you for that question. So, people have been telling me to share my story for the longest time. And this always comes up when I meet someone or when I'm talking to a person, and they just try to get a glimpse of some bits of my story. Today I tried to like summarize it, and and today's conversation even spoke about my story in a more holistic manner. Before now, in any speaking engagement that I go to, I'm speaking about it only in like specific areas and domains and things like that. So there's always been a need to formally put it into a proper a complete yes put it into a complete picture, just so that people can understand it better. And personally, I know that with my experience, it cuts across dyslexia, it cuts across psychological, it cuts across resilience, it cuts across empathy. And I'm always one person who is wanting to share, just because I know that even if it's one person, somebody's life can be better for it. Because I try to think that the purpose in some of my struggles is so that I can give back, empower people so they don't experience what I experienced. So, all that coupled together is what led to me writing the book, Redefining Dyslexia: My Path to Leadership and Change. That's the name
Amazing.
of the book. This
Amazing.
details every aspect of me, the life before and then the life after, and then
After.
the life that I'm currently on. So it's like a memoir, detailed.
Mhm.
It has all the information that,
Mhm.
yeah, it has all the information about it. So, um, but speaking about Black Brilliant and Dyslexic, it was originally created by Marcia Brissett Bailey, who is currently working on the issue of misrepresentations of dyslexics in the Black community. Just whenever you search successful dyslexics in the world, you see is predominantly dominated by white people, and which
Mm.
now starts to bring questions about whether or not dyslexia impacts, Black people and things like that, right? So Marcia decided to embark on a journey to work on the misrepresentation, and just called some of us along
Mm.
to journey with her, and that was what vetted the Black Brilliant and Dyslexic, where different Black people were sharing account of their experience being Black, being dyslexic, just so that we can have more people know that dyslexia is Black, dyslexia is white, dyslexia is not it doesn't discriminate. Anybody can be dyslexic, right? So
Mm.
that's what that is about. And then I also just finished a book as well for children, which is also the adaptation of Redefining Dyslexia but child friendly. This one is
Amazing.
yeah, it's
You
called.
did that. I
I did
remember when you
that.
mentioned.
Yes. So this one is called Audrey's Amazing Adventure. It's also my story, but again, more childlike. Yeah, similar. You read Defining Dyslexia, you read Audrey's Amazing Adventure. I'm like, okay, this is the same book, but different context, right? I didn't put the unnecessary details for kids, and it's more short formed for them. So yeah, that's about to be another book launch shot.
Wow. Wow. That
Yes.
is amazing. Dwayne, thank you so much for sharing all of this. This is just amazing. And I can't ignore the beautiful irony of the little girl who was told that there was something wrong with her. She can't read. She can't, she can't, all of these things. And then now all of a sudden you have written three whole books. I
Yes.
mean, wow, that's amazing. If there's anything you would say to her now, that girl, what would you say?
I would literally tell her that she should hold on. She should stay true to herself. Stay true to herself, because when I think back again, two things that have kept me going was that ambitiousness within me that knew that I could be more, right? And then the other bit of me also is empathy. I think empathy is one of the things that has kept me here and kept me from going to the dark side.
Mhm.
I'm so proud of the fact that there's no spirit of negativity or vengeance or any of those badness, in
Mhm.
my spirit or in my head space. So I'm definitely proud of her. I'm glad that she stuck to herself even in the confusing situation. And
Mhm.
so I would literally encourage her, because even now as an adult, I literally lean on her strength in staying true to herself.
Yeah.
And so yes, so stay true to herself, be resilient, don't take no for an answer, and yeah, you did this, baby girl.
Yeah, she did. She did. And what do you think she was like? What do you think if you were to go back in time, say during all of that struggle, and you looked back and you were like, "Hey, girl, if you hang in there, we're going to write. We're going to do all of these amazing things. We're going to start One Word Africa." What would you think the reaction would have been from her?
Are you crazy? What is that?
Yeah, that is so wholesome. That is really wholesome, and I really am looking forward to reading both of your books. I felt very bad when we were about to get on this conversation, and I'm like, you still haven't read Black Brilliant and Dyslexic, and I didn't know there was a second book and a third book and a potential fourth one, and that's amazing. Could you maybe tell us if anyone's interested in getting copies of the book, where we can find them?
Okay. So they're not out yet. But January is the proposed time for launch,
Okay.
especially for the children book.
Mm-hmm.
But you get any information on this on my personal social media or One Word Africa's personal social media. So
Okay.
my personal social media is just underscore doing. Very funny story. My handle just doing is literally was literally an attempt to also like reduce myself. Like I'm not more than this. It's just I'm just doing like
Yeah.
there's not much. I it's time to change it, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's still just underscore doing with a double N, and then
Mm-hmm.
One Word Africa is WORD, not WORLD.
Mm-hmm.
The idea behind the name is dyslexic struggle with words, so one
Mm-hmm.
word at a time. So please
Yeah.
don't make a mistake. If you're trying to find us, it's One Word Africa at
Yeah.
gmail.com or One Word Africa on all of our platforms, and you get all the information about the
Yeah.
book and all of our amazing projects.
I'm gonna put the links to all of your pages below too.
Thank
So
you.
just in case, yeah. Um, yeah, but I'm just curious because when you say dyslexics have a different way of perceiving words and all of that, I'm curious when you look at words or
Mhm.
when you look at letters, what do you see?
Okay, I let me before I answer the question, let me give context.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much on the internet that shows that dyslexics see words dancing. So I
Yeah,
want to explain
please.
what that what that means, right? So I like to use this analogy. As adults, if we see somebody one time
Mm-hmm.
and time pass and we see the person again, for
Mm-hmm.
people who are not very good with with recognizing faces,
Mm-hmm.
the face would look like a blur. Like I've seen this face before, but I just don't know where, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's there. Your brain is getting a sense of this is familiar. I just cannot, form a proper knowledge of what I am looking at. That's
Okay.
what it is with words. So,
Mm-hmm.
because the dyslexics struggle with word recognition, they will see a word and it is unfamiliar to them. So, they've not yet been taught how to properly manipulate words and see it and know that, okay, this is letter A and this is letter B or this is letter C or this is the word cat or this is the word goat, right? It is
Mm-hmm.
unfamiliar, but they've seen it, but it's just not like it's not familiar. So for some people, it would appear to be dancing. Some people will
Mm-hmm.
appear to be blurry. That's why sometimes you see them write B for D and things like that because their brain is literally struggling with word recognition and retrieval. And
Mm-hmm.
so in some sense it's not dancing, it's just unfamiliar.
Yeah, I see your point. I see your point. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so bringing it back to the context of Nigeria,
Hmm.
how are people, especially parents that you work with,
Hmm.
how are they generally receptive of this? Because, like you mentioned, when you were growing up, of course, our parents were not as aware as we are right now. So
Yeah.
it was difficult for your parents to kind of acknowledge that, oh, this was even a condition. It could not have been seen any other way but a failure on your path.
Hmm.
My sister also, I think I've mentioned it to you before, she did some work with children with special needs and neurodivergent kids,
Hmm.
and she would generally tell me that the parents she worked with, they would be in denial. They would
Yeah.
be offended even if it was mentioned to them that your child may be struggling with this or that. So I'd
Hmm.
like to know, what is the general reception you get from parents and all of that?
Okay. um it has grown. So we've been here for 8 years, and I would tell you that it has grown. Every time I wake up and I'm excited not because we have achieved like 100% turnover, but I'm excited because for me, like I mentioned, even if it's one person, I'm excited. But it's more than one. It is more than one, I promise you. But it has grown. It has grown because these days we still have parents that will be in denial, and even with them, I've come to understand it. With everybody wants to have a child, they have like ideas and notion of what they want their child to be. A lot of parents even want their children to live dreams that they were unable to fulfill for themselves. So when their child is born and is, in quotes, I'm saying in quotes,
Mm-hmm.
different from what their expectation of normal is supposed to be, they now start going through the 5 stages of grief. And some of them are in that stage for too long that they don't, snap out of it and do what they need to do. So I'm saying this because my work has taught me to have empathy beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Before I was angry. I'm like, how dare you not help your child? Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
wrong
Mm-hmm.
with you? But now,
Yeah.
even for teachers, I also, I went into school in 2022 as a teacher myself, being a special educator, and I sat in the shoes of teachers. So
Mm-hmm.
it has helped open my eyes again to see from everybody's angle, right? But
Yeah.
doesn't negate the fact that the longer you stay in denial, the longer you would get the intervention that your child needs, and that is very counterproductive for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in Nigeria, we are scratching the surface.
Yeah.
We are beginning to scratch the surface. It's beginning to look good. There's more conversations everywhere
Mm-hmm.
around dyslexia. Before it was just us championing the cause. Now I can count a couple of organizations who are doing amazing work on dyslexia, and I'm so excited to see it.
Yeah.
So yeah, the reception is more. Teachers even. I see teachers reach out to me and tell me, we have a wait list currently in One World Africa, and that's because whenever I make conversations like this, like speaking in an engagement like this, people would always reach out for help, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because we're just advocacy and not support, we couldn't like really provide this help that they needed. But now that we're creating structures, we now have a
Mm-hmm.
wait list, and on this wait list, you see parents who are reaching out for their children. You see teachers who are reaching out for their student. It's
Mm-hmm.
good to see. That
Yeah.
wasn't the case in
Mm-hmm.
2016 when we started.
Yeah.
So I would acknowledge that is
Yeah.
happening, and with
Okay.
more of this happening, I'm sure that in few years down the line it would be even much more better than this. So I'm
Yeah,
very hopeful.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's amazing because I think about it in the context of, let's say you and I both wear glasses,
Mm,
and to us it's just glasses. To our parents it was just glasses. Like, oh yeah, you have bad eyesight. Okay, the doctor prescribed this. Just let's get it. But we don't think about how there was once a time where this was very strange,
exactly.
and maybe if they told a parent that, oh, I'm sorry, your child has poor eyesight and they're going to need glasses, the parent might throw a tantrum, for lack of a better word. They
Hmm.
might be in denial, like, why? I don't want my child to be blind. It could be treated like a huge adversity. But now
Yeah.
the world has moved so much. There's so much awareness that we are at a point where, oh, you wear glasses? Cool. Like, it
Mhm.
doesn't even come up in conversation. Like, why would
Exactly.
I have to open my mouth and say I wear glasses? And with that kind of conversation happening right now, we are foreseeing a future, hopefully, where, it would be generally acceptable and the world makes provision for people that have to deal with all of these challenges.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing. What do you think is the future of dyslexia the future for dyslexia in Africa as a whole?
It is exciting for me because um, I'm seeing LinkedIn recently put dyslexic thinking as a skill,
Mm,
and I personally put it now in all of my applications, like any applications that requires my CV. If you ask for my skill, you see dyslexic thinking there, and I'm not the only one that was beginning to embrace
yeah.
the diversity of a dyslexia thinking brain.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen also organizations and companies who are also, you know, specifically seeking out dyslexic thinking in their staff, which shows that everybody's beginning to see, not everybody, but people are beginning to see the strength in dyslexic thinking. In Africa, however, we have plenty grounds to cover.
Mm-hmm.
But the future is it's exciting because um, the world is now a global village, right? So
Mm-hmm.
even when governments of some African countries refuse to take actions, they can, they can see what's happening around the world, and some of these things can help them, and it can bring them to the consciousness of things that they need to do.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that there's national collaborations on the UN funds. Those are avenues to help to bring this home. So I'm excited at the possibilities of what can happen for dyslexics in Africa. Before, I would not have dared to think that we can have a tribe, but
Mm-hmm.
we have a dyslexia tribe. It is growing, it is moving, and is going around Africa. So I'm excited at the possibilities. I'm excited at the possibilities that the dyslexics can thrive in their own strength, not
Okay.
that they have to be forced to be other people. Like for me, when I went back to school in 2017, for instance, despite my knowledge of self with dyslexia and how knowing how I know how to learn, because the system did not have accommodations for dyslexia, I had to still, do it the way neurotypical. I had to be tested the way neurotypical students are tested. I had to
Yeah.
study the way neurotypical students
Mm-hmm.
study. So I'm looking forward to a time where in our strength, because when using that example as well, in school I would first learn the way my brain can understand, and then convert it to the neurotypical way so I can pass my exams. That was strenuous, that was stressful. It would take me 3 times longer than
Effort.
take
Yeah.
every in every other student, which I think is unfair in itself.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to have like level the playground on those aspects where dyslexics can thrive in their strength. And I see it happening. I really see it happening. I don't know how long, before, we have, United Nations has like Vision 2030, for instance. I can't put a time to it right now, but I see it happening. I don't think it's impossible.
No.
If going by how dyslexia conversation was in 2016, I remember it so vividly today, and
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it then and seeing where we are now, nothing is impossible.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Absolutely. I love that. I would also like to ask because I remember you mentioned in 2015 where you were seeking to get assessed, you had problems accessing it.
Mhm.
Um, is it easier today?
It is not easier.
Mm-hmm.
It is still a difficulty because assessment is not accessible. It's really for people who have socioeconomic disadvantages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it is still not it's still not readily available. But at least you will find people that can do assessment, which is different
Mm-hmm.
from the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But still not readily available. Even I'm
Everyone.
currently I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping that I can design an assessment
Mm-hmm.
that, so assessment again, see me empathy. I understand
Mm-hmm.
sometimes why assessment has the cost that it has,
Mm-hmm.
because it takes time, it takes a process, and you utilize tools that you have to be licensed to have,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
So all of those things, contribute to the cost of assessment.
yeah.
So I'm however looking to see, but that's when I become an advanced researcher.
Mm-hmm.
Um, PhDs in the pipeline at some point.
Yeah.
But the goal from doing that is to be able to develop culturally relevant assessment tools that is Nigerian, so that we're not
Mm-hmm.
even having to pay for
Yeah.
licensing and
Mm-hmm.
changing rates from naira to dollar. Those are things that contribute. If we have
Mm-hmm.
something that is homegrown, it's traditional and culturally relevant to us, it is cheaper and is more accessible to people.
And I hope we get there. It's a long road, but I mean, we're already on the path. So I really do hope that we get there.
Yeah.
So do you have any parting messages or any aspect of this that we haven't covered and you'd like to maybe say something on?
I would just maybe speak more to support for dyslexic adults in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to just encourage anyone listening to give dyslexic people a chance, right? Some of them have grown again without proper support, and they're
Yeah.
now adults who are trying to navigate their daily living. So if you can create a structure of support, it will be lovely. And if you can help a dyslexic person around you identify their strength just so that they don't keep struggling, it would be nice. And then finally, when you hear us speak about dyslexia, it is our goal that you also tell another person about it, just so that you can increase the people that have the knowledge of dyslexia.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Love that. Just one last thing that you talked about that I would like to kind of cycle back to, and it's about how you said people on low socioeconomic income or profile and whatever, they
Yeah.
kind of struggle with accessing having access to the tests and all of that. And I just wanted you to specify that because this is something I've heard so much when it comes to neurodivergent conditions and all of that. People say that, oh, this is mostly something that affects the rich and not the poor. So
Mhm.
I'd like for you to speak on the universality of it as well, please.
Okay. Um, so dyslexia cuts across every age group, every race. Earlier in this conversation, we spoke about misrepresentation in the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
There was also so as well with the socioeconomic group.
Mm-hmm.
It is not. It's the way dyslexia is developed has nothing to do with how much you earn or what tribe you are. Anybody can be dyslexic. It happens. 1 in 5 people, according to statistics. We still even haven't established the statistics here in Nigeria, but one in
Mm-hmm.
5 people are predicted to have dyslexia. So which will tell you that if you go into the slum, you will see 1 in 5. If you go into the bank, you see 1 in 5. If you go into school environment, you see 1 in 5.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere you go, you will see 1 in 5. So people in low income communities have dyslexia, and for them, they're even at more disadvantage already because some of the remediation or intervention required for a child that has dyslexia requires intricate specific intervention, one-on-one interventions in some cases that low income communities cannot afford to have because they already even have limitations in terms of academic quality to education, right?
Yeah.
um, the type, the strength of the staff that they have, or even
Mm-hmm.
the structures available to them to get literacy skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, in being dyslexic, where you're already not even having proper access to interventions and remediations for you, that would put you at a bigger risk.
Mm-hmm.
For low income communities, sometimes we always have to be sure that it's not a case of illiteracy. It's not a case of they were not even taught. Do you get dyslexics are people who you have taught them through, the traditional way, but they just struggle to learn because you're not can learn. But for
Yeah.
people in income, sometimes we even have to be sure that it's not the case that they were not exposed to the right literacy instructions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they also have it as much as people in the urban areas.
Thank you so much. And that whole statistics that you talk about is quite high. And I'd just like to put it more in context for people listening. It's like when you think about 5 people that you know, 5 people that are actually there to your heart and you're close to, you interact with and everything. So the statistics is telling you that there's a high possibility that one out of those 5 people, not saying is definitely that, but this is the context of the statistics, that one in those 5 is likely dyslexic. So
Yeah.
thank you so so much doing for spending time with us. You are amazing. I told you guys in the beginning that doing is just amazing, and I oversimplified with that introduction, and you have seen it for yourself that she is. And like I mentioned earlier, I told you the world is a better place because you are in it, because truly you are defining paths for people that otherwise would have lived in a hopeless world, and we are all very inspired by you. You said when you were growing up, you used to be called the first lady, and I'm sitting here thinking, what first lady you are, Madam President?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much. You have made it all the way to the end of this episode. Your support means everything to us. Help us achieve our goal of becoming the number one health and wellness podcast in Africa and the world by engaging with the podcast. Like, subscribe, and share it with the people that you love. And if you'd like to connect with our guest speaker, you'll find their contact information in the description box. We truly appreciate you for being a part of the Health Space community.